Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is Unconstrained Growth. $6 billion plus former UBS team finds real freedom to focus on clients. It's a conversation with Tony Smith, the CEO of Stonegate Investment Group. I'm Mindy Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for financial advisors. At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade, and each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. If you'd like to talk, please feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. Are you a financial advisor who's curious about whether you're in the best place to serve clients, or if there might be a better way to optimize your business for the future? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a new book that serves as a self-guided journey, walking you through the key steps that Diamond Consultants takes with our advisor clients, whether considering change or not. Visit diamond-consultants.com/thebook to learn more. Constrained. It's a word that many advisors who live in the wirehouse world use when describing the motivations around their move. It's a descriptor that demonstrates the feeling of a lack of freedom to serve clients and grow one's business in a way that resonates with their vision, and not the mandates of a larger firm, bank entity, or shareholders. Tony Smith was one of a team of 7 at UBS serving high net worth clients, generating some $18 million in annual revenue and managing assets in the vicinity of $4 billion. Yet the feeling that things had changed during his 14-year tenure at the firm had grown stronger over time. Increasing constraints, bureaucracy, and an overall lack of freedom, all threads that Tony felt were a common symptom of life in the big brokerage firms. And ultimately, the desire to have greater flexibility and autonomy became a strong pull to consider independence. With 2 team members who were close to the end of their careers with some 5 decades in the industry each, one might think independence was a bridge too far. Yet Tony led the team in their launch of Stonegate Investment Group to achieve what they describe as unconstrained and highly personalized experience for their high net worth clients. And since its launch in 2021, Stonegate has grown to managing $6 billion in client assets. It's an incredible story that offers a perspective on why advisors seek change and how that motivation and clarity around goals can result in extraordinary growth. There's a lot to learn from Tony, so let's get to it. Tony, I'm really grateful you're here with me today. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the professional journey that led you to launch Stonegate Investment Group in July of 21.
Professional journey is I started my career early, age 20, working for a wealthy family here in Birmingham. Did that for 7 years, captively managing their money, left them as my first sort of beachhead client. Spent 15 years at the many versions of what became Smith Barney, from Shearson Lehman Brothers to buying Solomon to you name it. Left Smith Barney in 2007. By that time, I had a pretty big team. We opened a private wealth office for UBS in Birmingham in 2007. Ran that office for them as the manager, had my own single team office, did that for 14 years. And then ultimately launched our own independent RIA in July of 2021.
Thank you for sharing that, and so much good stuff to unpack that, because you've had so many different perspectives. The Smith Barney in all its iterations, life at UBS, life as a manager, life as building a big team. So let's jump in. Your business is 7 partners generating about 18 million in annual revenue. At least that was the numbers when you guys left UBS in 21. Tell us a little bit about your partners. I read that somewhere that you had a combined 195 years of experience. It's Chris Compton, Matt Brown, Mark Summer, James Allen, Jerry Duncan, and William Richardson. So, what would you say about the conglomeration of the 8 of you?
I have worked with these guys maybe for a long time, essentially almost my entire career. I've added to the team over my 30 plus years of doing this. Both Billy and Jerry had probably 100 years of experience between the two of them. I think Chris has now been with me on the team for probably 24, 25 years. Matthew's probably been with me 15 years or so. Jay probably 10. So what has changed, and your numbers are accurate, when we left UBS, it was about, 4,344 AUM business doing about 18 million, and however it is that the UBS would measure revenue. What has changed from the time that we launched Stonegate to now is that 3 of the original equity partners have been redeemed. 2 of them have fully retired. So Mark and Billy Richardson have fully retired. Jerry is still an active member of the team, but he no longer has equity in Stonegate Investment Group, which is the RIA. But I couldn't ask for better teammates. These guys are first class. They all have their own sort of strengths and weaknesses like we all do. But it's been a fantastic experience to work with these guys.
All right. Well, again, a lot to unpack, and thank you. And clearly, you've built an extraordinary business. So, $4.4 billion business in AUM when you left UBS in 21, an extraordinary business by anybody's measure. How many clients? What are the average size of the clients? Give us a sense of the work you did for them, the kind of business you were doing.
So we look at clients from a household perspective. So in 2021, we had probably 180 households that made up that 4,344 of AUM, which I would say average is about 25 million per household. That number today, if you fast forward essentially 3.5 years since we launched, that number today is about 6.2 or 6.3 billion, and the household number is about 230 or 240. So the average size of the household really hasn't changed. It's pretty focused at about the $25 million level.
Got it. And how about your support staff? What does that look like now versus then?
It's similar, other than I do have a full-time CEO, Chief Operating Officer. I do, from a regulatory perspective, have a full-time Chief Compliance Officer. And then I have 3 other registered, what the industry, I presume, would call client service associate people. And then I have my producing partners. I have a couple of young analysts, and I have a full-time fixed income portfolio manager.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your time at UBS. So you personally spent about 14 years there. And I want to get into what changed at the firm over time that motivated you to explore options elsewhere. But let's start first with what drew you to UBS in the first place, what was great about your time there, and then what changed.
So I would say what drew us to UBS is, if you rewind back to 2007, when we joined, the U.S. economy was entering into what ultimately became the great financial crisis. And so every one of the big U.S. banks, in our opinion, had their own problems and baggage. And so we chose UBS because it was an international bank, well-known brand. We didn't perceive at the time that they had as many problems as potentially some of the U.S. banks did. And so I think just their financial strength, their breadth of product was appealing to us, and the fact that we weren't going to work for a U.S. bank.
Okay. And then what changed in those 14 years?
The biggest thing to me that probably changed was leadership. So I was very close to Mr. Bob McCann when he was running UBS's private wealth business and what they called UBS Americas. I was disappointed when he retired. Didn't really have the same relationship with the senior management team that I had before. And there were
Lots of moving parts when you work for a big firm as far as trying to get something done or being told how you need to price your business. These threshold levels where you needed to price your business above a certain level or you were going to get some sort of a payout haircut. None of that really sat well with us. And so it was a combination of lots of different things, but I would say leadership and just bureaucracy and constant grid changes. And this is not a UBS thing. I think this is just I think that's just big broker dealer world in general.
Well, you'd be right about that. Now, I want to ask you a question specifically about Jerry and Will, the two senior-most partners when you moved in terms of tenure, had 46 and 50 years of industry experience at the time of your move. So first question is, in my experience, the most unlikely constituency to go independent are the late career advisors. They're the ones that have the most to move. They're the most the least unlikely to move, I should say. They're the most risk averse. They have the most to lose from a financial perspective. They don't want to put anything at risk, and they're most resistant to change. So what do you think? How were you able to convince them? Was it a hard sell? And how did you get them comfortable with making the move?
It was not a hard sell. We had spent many years prior to launching in 2021. I think we actually started our own internal due diligence process in probably 2017. So it was no secret to them that we were planning to potentially go independent, and they were kept in the loop the entire time as far as the pros and cons of what we were going to do, how it was going to impact them. But ultimately, Mindy, I think it comes down to trust. So they say there's no I in team. Okay. So both of these guys are fantastic teammates, and they trusted me as the leader to make the best and the right decision for our clients, our business, and ourselves in that order. And ultimately, that's what we did. But there was a lot of trust that those guys extended to me because you're correct. They had been in the industry a long time. But I told them, just trust me, and this is going to work out. And they did.
And I agree with you. Trust is everything, because that's the only way it works is when these senior, soon to retire or late career advisors have younger partners that they not only trust, but that can get them comfortable with some ways to soften the financial blow. So can you share with us a little bit about that? Yes, trust, but how did they get comfortable with the financial implications of a move to independence, meaning turning down a big transition package to move and turning down the ability to just retire out through Alpha UBS?
So I'll start in reverse order. So neither one of them at the time were interested in the Alpha proposition, whether it be at UBS or any other firm. They weren't ready to retire. And so then it just became a mathematical proposition for me to show them, look, if you want to go down the Alpha path, here's what it looks like. It's ordinary income and the consequences that come along with that. Or if you will trust me and we go down this path and it works as I suspect that it will, we will redeem you out at long-term capital gains. And it just became a math equation. You can be one of two things. You can be short-term greedy or you can be long-term greedy. Short-term greedy to me is to take check or to Alpha or a transition package or whatever terminology you'd like to describe it as. Or you can choose to be long-term greedy and essentially take no money up front, go build yourself a business, and hopefully you will get the financial rewards of that on the back end. And I was able to convince them that was going to ultimately be a better path for our business.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that it takes trust and a willingness to want what's best for the business and the clients and all of that. But still in all, in my experience anyway, most late career advisors are most concerned about protecting the short term. I know I've got X if I just follow the status quo. It's scary and hard to think about putting any of that at risk to bet on the long term. So what do you think it was about these guys? Was it about the fact that they were just so fiercely protective of the business, about being so fiercely trustworthy of you, about being such visionaries that they were able to see what was possible in the long term, all of the above? What do you think it was?
I think it's the trust that they had in me. I think they trusted me when we left Smith Barney and joined UBS, and we were effectively able to triple the size of the business in 14 years. And I told them, I think we can do it again. But these guys are fiercely protective. But I think one thing that made it easier is that they weren't doing or they weren't participating for the financial reward. They were participating for what was going to be best for the business, whether they were a part of the business for 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years.
You just hit the nail on the head. They weren't participating. They didn't follow because their primary motivation was personal financial gain. It was about other things. So let me ask you a question. If you were speaking to, or if I were talking with them and they were speaking to other late career advisors whose partner, I just met with a very significant team where the next generation partner is probably late 40s, early 50s, and the late career advisor is probably more like 64 or 65, and very concerned all about protecting the business and fiercely loyal to clients and trusting of his younger partner, but still worried about protecting the status quo, not wanting to put anything at risk. So what do you think those two, Jerry and Will, would say to somebody like that, other senior advisors in that position?
But what I have told them and the way that I describe the teams and or the advisors that you're attempting to use as an example is I think this business is full of great advisors and great people that at some point in their career hit what I refer to as the complacency plateau. So the complacency plateau is they get comfortable. All right, at whatever level of production, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, they've got a wife, they got 2 kids and a dog, they got a beach house, they got a lake house, they got a country club membership. Life is comfortable for them. And I get it. And once you're comfortable, people don't want to change. These guys were never complacency plateau people. I don't have anybody on my team that even understands what the complacency plateau is. And I think that's a magic of how you keep growing a business is it's a little bit of a game. You don't do it for the money. You do it because you want to grow the business.
Yeah. And I think that's really the key. And I appreciate you sharing that. How long did it take? How many years did it take after launch for Jerry and Will to be redeemed in your parlance?
Let's see, this is 2024. So both of them were redeemed in early 2023. And then Mark retired later in 23. I want to say October of 23.
Got it. So that's the other piece of it was it sounds like you were able to get them comfortable with the fact that they weren't going to have to wait 10 years to get their money out or to be redeemed. They were able to do it in a couple of years.
Right. We originally told them my plan for them was that we will have you redeemed out in no more than 5 years. And we were able to do it essentially in 2 years and change.
I love it. Okay, that makes great sense. Okay, let me ask you, go back to something you mentioned. You said that you began talking about leaving UBS, and I assume thinking about independence as the next step in 2017. So that's a 4-year thought process. How was that all about active due diligence for 4 years? How were you getting educated? What were you doing in that 4-year period?
We were essentially talking to everybody in the independent space, Mindy, or quasi-independent space. So anybody from an RIA aggregate to somebody like a Dynasty, to somebody at the time like a Focus, to talking to all of the various vendors, offer wares and services to the independent space. Obviously spent a lot of time talking to custodians for the independent space. We have a fairly large business. And so we felt like we need to spend a lot of time on the custodial side of that decision, which we did, but we ultimately talked to, I think, every custodian on the planet. We looked at CRM systems. We looked at trading systems. We looked at performance reporting systems. We turned over every rock that we could turn over, and it took us about 4 years to get comfortable with our decision. And we had a plan A and a plan B. Plan A was to go completely, fully independent, build it yourself, which is what we ultimately did. And plan B was to go with somebody that would offer you more of I'm going to call it a turn solution. So let's just say someone similar to a dynasty. And I know that there are other people out there that do it as well.
Right. So, Tony, you mentioned that two paths. One was joining an entity that had already established it, and two was essentially do it yourself. What led you to the decision to ultimately do it yourself, and how impactful in a negative way was doing it yourself and this 4-year due diligence process on growing the business? Like, that's a lot of time and energy and effort to, one, do the due diligence for 4 years, and two, take the time to choose every CRM and make every single decision impacting the business.
So yes, ma'am, it's very time consuming, but it was going to be a very big decision for us. So we wanted to really not have a predetermined timeline. We wanted to get comfortable on our own timeline as to how long that would take. So it ultimately took 4 years. I wish it would have only taken 2, but it took 4. And lots of decisions to be made along the way. We could have joined another group, probably would have been easier, but I'm not sure necessarily that easier is always better. There were some management changes at the other group, which ultimately led us to just say, you know what, we're just going to do this ourselves. And so you make all of these decisions, from custodians to trading platforms to performance reporting systems to CRM. And there's a laundry list of things that you go through, but I think what I did not appreciate is how difficult it is to integrate all of those things. Like, you can go buy the best performance reporting system and the best CRM and the best trading system, but now you have to make them work. You have to make them talk to each other. And I'm not saying that was an impossible task. I will tell you that 4 years after launching, we are still doing things to get these various systems and vendors, services and software to communicate the way that we would like them to.
And that probably that's one of the biggest reasons why some folks opt out of do it yourself, because firms like a Dynasty, which is a service provider, or some already established much larger RIAs, have figured that out. They've spent the time and the money and the energy to figure out how to create the infrastructure so that, in your language, the systems talk to each other. So how'd you get around that when it was do it yourself?
It was a painful process. And luckily for us, you have a 14-person team. So we had lots of manpower to struggle through the startup phase of the business, I would say. But if you were a much smaller team, in Tony's opinion, with 2-3 partners and 2-3 support staff, I'm not sure you have enough horsepower, in my opinion, to navigate your way through the process and still transition your business successfully.
I would agree with that completely. I think that's a really fair statement. And it doesn't mean you couldn't go independent. It just means, the good news is there's so many different versions of independence today. If you don't have the horsepower or the appetite, that's the other part of it. Not everybody would want to do it on their own. If you don't have the appetite to do all this due diligence and make every decision and start up from scratch on your own, there's lots of different ways to do it. And we've been privileged on this show to interview many leaders from many of these platform firms and larger established RIAs that do just that. That's the good news. I want to ask you a question. So in mid-November of this year, of 24, UBS, your former firm, announced a change to compensation for 2025 that has angered many advisors, large and small. And essentially, the headline of the comp change is that UBS will no longer compensate team members according to a combined grid rate based on the entire team's revenue. Now, that stance, compensating an entire team based upon compensating individual members based upon the entire team's revenue, made UBS an outlier for a lot of years and something UBS advisors loved. But instead, today, all members' pay rates will hinge on the highest producing members' revenue, not the entire team. And there'll be a haircut to the core grid rate, which will definitely impact the firm's smaller or average producers. What I want to ask you is, in most cases, when a firm changes comp, there are winners and losers. In this case, from talking to so many UBS advisors, most every advisor feels like a loser. Even if the change doesn't directly impact them or their team, what they're seeing it as is a loss of control. UBS has not been shy about talking about how they need to improve profit margins, and they've decided to ding the advisor in order to do so. And advisors are not happy about it. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If your team was still at UBS when this comp change was announced, how would you have felt about it?
Well, with the beauty of hindsight 2020, I never liked any change, nor do I think any advisor likes any change when it comes to their compensation. But I will say, when UBS launched the program that you were referring to, where everybody got a payout at the combined team grid, there were lots of games that were played at UBS as far as 2 or 3 advisors in one office would quote unquote team with 2 or 3 advisors in the other office in order to game the system and get the combined team revenue up to a level where they could maximize payout. But that was not a team. So I think what UBS was trying to encourage, in my opinion, actually backfired on them. And people that had no business being part of a larger team became a part of a larger team for nothing but compensation, not for service, not for delivering a better client experience, but for attempting to manage their payout. Now, they didn't make the rules. UBS made the rules.
Yeah.
The change that they recently made would not have impacted my team. All right. So I would say, would I have been bent out of shape about it? Probably not, because it wouldn't have impacted, because we were already at the maximum grid rate.
Yep. So you said something that I want to talk about here, is that, so you're an example of a team that it wouldn't have affected, probably one of the rare teams or advisors it wouldn't have affected. But I think that notion that advisors who work for big firms feel they need to, you said, attempt to manage their payout is what's at issue. It's what drove, I imagine, people like you and others to the independent space, being in a position where you, as an advisor who work for a big firm, don't have agency or control over your take-home economy or how you are compensated. And so they're forced to play games or to manage their payout by forming quasi teams or non-teams, whatever you want to call it. Do you think that's a fair observation?
I think it's certainly a fair observation. I think most advisors want to think that they can control their own destiny, and they want to be able to price their business. However, the market allows them to price their business to deliver the service and the value to the client that is reasonable and the client expects. So it doesn't surprise me that people are unhappy about it. And I think that's why people, go to the independent space, is to be more in control of their own destiny. And I think the trend continues outside of the complacency plateau people. I'm not sure those people, frankly, ever leave.
Right. Or at best, they may move to another traditional firm where you're not necessarily moving the needle in terms of how much agency or control you have, but you are getting paid a lot of money in order to make the move.
Right. So it's back to short-term greed or long-term greed. Which choice do you want to make?
Yep. I don't disagree with you. And by the way, not necessarily a judgment or a pejorative, because there are plenty of really high quality advisors that either opt to stay put or make a move from a UBS to a Merrill Lynch or a Merrill Lynch to a Morgan Stanley. Partly maybe because they're complacent, but partly a lot of the time it's because they just are big firm people. They're not entrepreneurial by nature. They don't really want to be independent. But let's pivot a little because I want to ask you, how does it feel to be independent? Like, what feels different to you? What is different to you being an independent business owner than what it felt like to be an advisor, an employee of either Smith Barney and its predecessors or UBS?
I think the biggest thing you feel is freedom, flexible, unconstrained. You can choose to focus wherever you want to focus. You can build whatever you want to build. You can service it however you want to service it. You can pay your people however you think they should be compensated for the value that they bring to you and your team and your organization. One of the biggest fights I think that people in big broker dealer world, myself included, is you were always fighting for your staff. You could never get enough staff. They never wanted to pay enough. And this is, once again, it's not a UBS thing. I think it's a Merrill thing, a Smith Barney thing, a Morgan Stanley thing. I think it's an everybody thing. But once you get to the independent space, you can pay your people however you deem to want them to be compensated for what they do for your clients and your business.
Including the freedom to have the late career folks retire out in the manner in which they want to. They don't have to abide by the strict rules that exist in the big firms' retire in place programs, correct?
Absolutely correct. It's back to freedom and flexibility. I would love to say, with the beauty of hindsight, that we could have stayed at UBS and taken our 3 or $4 billion AUM, $18 million revenue business. That business today is 6.1 or 6.2, and it's doing almost 25 million. I would love to be able to tell you we could have done that. I'm not sure we could have.
You're reading my mind because that was going to be a question. What is it that you're able to do as an independent? Why not? Why couldn't you have grown almost $2 billion in assets in the same 3-year period if you were still at UBS?
I think part of it is open architecture. I think part of it is how you're able to price your business and not have to worry about grids and floors and caps and any such thing. I think part of it is, for example, 2 years ago, we developed what the industry calls an SPV, a special purpose vehicle. We had an idea that we thought technology was getting obliterated, which it was, in October of 2022. So we put together a vehicle, built a portfolio. Stonegate partners put money in as limited partners, and Stonegate clients put money in. It was a vehicle that we ultimately just unwound, and everybody made 40% on their money. And we were all in it together. Like, the advisors were putting their money exactly where we were advising the clients to put their money. But that is something I never could have done in UBS or Merrill or anywhere else. They're not going to let you commingle advisor money with client money in an investment. So it's all of those kind of things, back to freedom and flexibility that you have. The world is your oyster. It's unlimited as to what you can do.
What about the downside? Like, how overwhelming was it when you first went independent? How about the downside of was there a sense of taking a couple of steps backwards in order to get to where you are today? Like, even just the fact that many members of your team spent 4 years doing due diligence. What about those challenges? Like, what's the downside to this? How about giving up the scaffolding and support of a big firm?
Well, number one, you're going to give up a lot of your time in the first, I would say, 6 to 9 months of launching, because you have to transition the business. Now, the good news is that you quickly find out that your clients are your clients. Like, your clients weren't doing business with you because you were at UBS or you were at Merrill or you were at Morgan Stanley. They were doing business with you. All right. So transitioning the clients, or what the industry would call moving the assets, I don't think any advisor should ever be afraid of that. What they should be afraid of is what I was describing with respect to systems integration and actually making the business, like running the business. Transferring the assets is the easiest part of any transition, at least in our experience. It's Then running the business, getting the performance system up and running and connected to your custodian and getting accurate data feeds and getting a trading system that you can actually trade 200 households at a time in one block order. So those are the kind of things. And so, yes, it was a step backwards initially because we had to build it. Luckily for us, we navigated our way through it and we were able to build it, and it has now ultimately worked out. There are easier ways to go independent than the path that we chose, but we made up our mind that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it our way. And our way was to pick and choose every single piece, every single partner, every single vendor, every single everything that we wanted. Now, maybe that was the right decision. Maybe it wasn't. It's ultimately all worked out. But that to me is the biggest challenge. There's lots of long days in the beginning of building the business and transitioning the business. But luckily, those days are in the rearview mirror now.
Yeah. So let's talk now about Stonegate, your firm. How did your values as a leader and advisor influence your decision to launch the firm?
I think the leader of the firm has to have an entrepreneurial spirit, and he or she has to share that spirit with their team members, and their team members have to have what we call shared common goals. Our shared common goal was to own our own firm. How exactly we were going to do it is what took 4 years. But there was no disagreement over the direction we wanted to go in. It was how exactly were we going to get there and what choices were we going to make along the way.
How would you describe Stonegate's value proposition?
Everybody always asks me, what does Stonegate do? And my short answer is built to keep wealthy people wealthy. What do I mean by that? Our average household's about $25 million. These are already wealthy families by whatever your definition of real wealth is. They come to Stonegate because they want to stay wealthy. We're okay owning the Walmart. We understand the risk and reward profile of the Walmart. We're really not interested in you going out there trying to find us the next Walmart because I tell them I'm not that smart. So, keeping wealthy people wealthy is what we do. We spend a lot of time on planning. I think one of the smartest things we did back in the UBS days was we brought on a full-time estate planning attorney. So he is not a revenue producing partner. He does nothing but estate and wealth transfer planning for our clients, because what we found out was, generally speaking, the under $10 million has a fairly significant interest in either financial planning or retirement planning. They want to make sure they have enough money to live however it is they choose to live the rest of their life. Once you get to 25, we don't have a lot of demand for financial planning or retirement planning. These people have figured out they got enough money. Their issue now is, what do I do with the wealth that I've created? What's the most efficient way to transfer this to my kids or my grandkids or my church or my university or my favorite charity? And how much can I do and still not impact my own lifestyle? So bringing on a full-time estate planning attorney was probably one of the smartest things that we ever did as a team.
Right. But you did that while at UBS. So that actually raises the question about, you say the mantra is we want to keep wealthy people wealthy. You couldn't have done that at UBS?
Oh, we could have done it as long as you wanted to put up with the bureaucracy of everything that comes with working with a big firm. And it was not, UBS's bureaucracy was no different than Smith Barney's. I don't think Smith Barney, now that they're Morgan Stanley, it's any different. I don't think it's any different at Merrill. It's, do you want to be in complete control of your own destiny? You want to be able to price your business exactly how you want to price it and not have somebody else tell you how to price it. You want to be able to do some creative things that you couldn't have done in a big wirehouse. Those are just, to me, some of the flexibility that comes with owning and running your own business, but it's certainly not for everybody.
Most of those things, with the exception that you just named, with the exception probably of being able to do some creative things that you couldn't do at a wirehouse, are things that really benefit you, the business owner. What was the pitch to clients? What was in it for clients for you to be independent?
Part of it is just custodial. Part of it is flexibility of being able to shop for products, services, solutions completely outside of UBS's channel. So even though you could, in theory, shop outside of UBS's channel and go to a third-party manager, UBS was always in the middle. So I could go hire Mindy Diamond Asset Management on UBS's platform, but UBS was going to take a part of it. Why should that happen? Now I can go directly to Mindy, pay Mindy what Mindy has to have, and there's no middleman.
So is it ultimately cheaper for the clients?
Absolutely, it has been. Actually, client asset management fees have gone down, and not because there's just fee compression in the business. It's because we were able to eliminate a lot of expenses that were, I would say, going to the mothership or the sponsor or your employer. You can now take that and reduce the client's fee.
So I imagine that was a powerful selling point to clients, but were there any skeptics? Did you lose any clients that were concerned about you leaving a big firm?
We did have some skeptics. I think that's normal. I think there's always going to be skeptics when you make a decision like we made. Now, luckily for us, we were able to overcome the skepticism, and we did not lose or were not unable to transition any significant relationship that we had. But once again, I think that goes back to, you got to understand, the relationships are yours. They're not UBS's, they're not Morgan Stanley's, they're not Merrill's, as much as they would like to think and believe that. The clients are doing business with you.
Yeah. And that's predicated on long relationships where you, as the advisor, have always done right by those clients. There are many advisors, not that they've done wrong by clients, but that don't have that confidence. Many people are not as confident as you might have been that all of their clients would follow. But here, to me, my advice to those folks is you have to be comfortable with one of two things, hopefully both. One is that your clients are yours because of you, not because of your firm, and you've always done right by them. And two, comfortable with the fact that there may be some skeptics, there may be some breakage, and you're okay with the notion of shrink to grow. Would you agree with that?
I would completely agree with that. I think the other thing that shouldn't be overlooked is you don't really, in my opinion, become a full fiduciary on behalf of your clients until you're in the end. Now, you can claim that you're acting in the best interest of the client in broker-dealer world, but you're not held to the same standard. You don't get to wear that hat until you're out on your own.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up, Tony, by asking you, when you look back at your career, what do you, at the end of the day, and when you're in the position of your partner that fully retired and those that are less active in the business now, what do you hope your legacy will be as an advisor?
That I always did the right thing, regardless of circumstance.
I love it. Beyond that, are there any parting words for advisors who may be considering their future? Which, quite honestly, that's a broad question and a loaded question, because I don't know of any advisors, either the 25-year-old that's just starting out as an advisor or the senior member, soon to be retiring advisor who has maybe a few years left to work, either of a big team or a small one. Everyone is considering their future and should. The great news is that from my perspective, there's more options and possibilities than there ever were before, and that's a good thing. But what advice would you give? Let's start, first of all, with those that were in your shoes, senior leaders of really successful teams who are wondering whether they should stay or go. And by the way, that's the title of a book I just wrote called Should I Stay or Should I Go? And it was written specifically for elite teams like yours. So curious what your advice would be there.
I would tell them to have courage, have conviction, have confidence in their relationships and the relationships that they've built with their clients. And I would tell them, don't let fear of the unknown paralyze you into no decision at all. So if you make a decision to stay where you are, you've made a decision, and that's great. Maybe that decision is the best decision for, as I say, your clients, your business, and yourself, in that order. Don't get those things out of order, or you may make an incorrect decision. But what's the right decision for the clients, for your business, and for yourself long term? not this week, next month, next year. What's the best decision for the next 5 or 10 or 15 years, whether or not you're going to be an active member of the team or a partially or fully retired member of the team? What's the best thing for the clients? Because hopefully you're going to be doing business with the next generation of the same client and then the next generation. So, I mean, you've got to look at a business like you're trying to build a business for 30 or 40 or 50 years, not 3, 4, or 5 years.
Yeah. And how does that advice change, Tony? Final question. How does that advice change for someone younger in the business who aspires to build a business like Tony Smith has?
In my opinion, Mindy, the business is different today. I think it was a little simpler and a little easier to come into the business like I did in the late 80s and early 90s and build a business, build a team. I think as you're a young person coming in today, if you think you're going to go out there and build a team like mine, I wouldn't say it's not possible. I would say it's not probable. I think in today's world of big teams with lots of skill sets, your best bet is to join one of these large teams and contribute your skill set. And hopefully you're joining a team that truly does want to continue to grow. That, I think, is what I would do if I were a young person coming today, is to try to find a team that's focused on growth, try to find a team that's focused on the type of client that I want to work with and where I can bring my skill set and contribute and help this team grow.
Yeah. And I agree with that 100%. It's very difficult to be an individual advisor, come into the business at 30 years old and build something today because there's just a lot more roadblocks to doing so. The one thing I would say that I advise younger advisors is, yes, to join a team, to make sure that not only is the team interested in growing, but that the team is interested in investing in you to eventually allow you to have autonomy and freedom and build something great, that you're not just going to be an indentured servant of this big team for the rest of your career.
Completely agree.
Well, Tony, this has been an absolute pleasure. I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and the secret behind the extraordinary business you've built. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for Stonegate. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us today.
You are very welcome. It was my pleasure, and I thank you for having me on, and I look forward to future conversations.
As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibilities seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.